Good afternoon. We will start this afternoon by reciting the Refuge and Bodhicitta prayer. O sanje chudan zoge chonam la chancho balu dane chabzom je dagi jinso gibe sanam je Drola penjur sanje drobal sho sanje chedan tsoge chonam la chancho pardo dane chapsum je dage jinzo gibe sanam je Drola penjur sanje drobar sho sanje chedang tsoje chonam la chancho bardo dane jabsum je dage jinso gibe sanam je Drola benjir sanje drobar sho. Now in English. Until enlightenment I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the sublime Sangha. By the merit of being generous and so forth, may I become a Buddha to help beings. Until enlightenment I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the sublime Sangha. By the merit of being generous and so forth, may I become a Buddha to help beings. Until enlightenment I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the sublime Sangha. By the merit of being generous and so forth, may I become a Buddha to help beings. May all beings be happy and have the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be parted from the highest joy, which is free of all suffering. May they be without attachment and aversion to those near or far, and dwell in the great equanimity. And the Dharma Expanse Palace of Akanishta is the essence of the Buddhas of the three times who shows me directly my mind is Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious exalted Guru. Please bless me and all sentient beings that our minds become the Dharma. Bless us that the Dharma become the path. Bless us that the path dispel confusion. Bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. So now think to yourself that we must bring all of our mothers, all sentient beings throughout space, to the state of completely perfect Buddhahood. And in order to do that, we must listen to, contemplate, and meditate upon the Dharma. And so that is why we are engaging in listening to the Dharma this afternoon. So with this motivation of bodhicitta, please listen. The Dharma we are listening to is the Treasury of Abhidharma by Vasubandhu, as explained by the Ninth Karmapa Wangchuk Dorje in his commentary Youthful Play. The Treasury of Abhidharma has 8 areas. They're called areas in this text rather than chapters. There are different words used in the Sanskrit for this and translated in different ways into the Tibetan, and so being probably a little overly literally, I also called them areas rather than chapters in my translation, though I think other translations call them, one calls them parts and another calls them chapters. Be that as it may, the third area, the teachings on the world, has 2 parts. The world of sentient beings, which we have completed, and the world that contains them, the external world environment. The teachings on the external world environment have 3 parts: the supporting container of the world, the sizes, or the measure, we could say, the sizes of sentient beings, which we discussed yesterday. And so today we have come to the units of measure. So, units of measure. More math, more arithmetic. It's often said among Tibetan students that if you're going to study, if you're going to study Madhyamaka and Prajnaparamita and validity, you have to debate a lot. You have to be good at debating. If you're going to study the Vinaya, you have to remember a lot of stories. And if you're going to study the Abhidharma, you have to be good at counting. So here we are, we're engaging with the question of what are we counting? How are we counting? What are the units? Because yesterday we spoke about, and in the past couple week and a half or so, we've been talking a lot about distances, leagues, earshots, fathoms, and so forth. And so the question is, well, what are these units of measure? We talked yesterday about an eon. What is an eon? So that is the question that this final part of the chapter speaks about. So this is basically the units of measure has 2 parts: what is combined, and then the units that measure what has been combined. So what is combined here, what we mean by what is combined, are basically the smallest fundamental things that you're combining in order to make. The units of form, name, and time are particles, letters, and instants. And here the word letters should probably be, last year we discussed this in talking about the first area. We talked about how actually it's probably better to translate this as phonemes. So particles, this would be like atoms, indivisible particles. Phonemes are those little basic bits of speech, the all those different sounds that we do that we put together to make words. And then instants are, here refers to the shortest possible instance of time. So the commentary reads, the smallest units of aggregated form, name, and time are particles, letters, and instants respectively. And now I'm realizing that in my commentary there I made a mistake. Particles in this context are aggregated particles that are objects of the faculties and perform the functions of obscuring and obstructing. So what this means is that when you're talking about an atom, actually an atom here is too small a particle to be perceived. It's beyond our ability to perceive. So when we talk about the sense base of form, what we mean by the sense base of form, in other words, we mean the smallest particles that we can see, which are conglomerations of atoms. But they're considered truly existent, ultimately existent particles, even though they're conglomerations in this particular presentation. This is an issue that later gets expanded upon by other masters, including Dignaga and Dharmakirti. But here, we're just taking it kind of as a given. You've got the units, the atoms are the smallest possible, the earth, fire, a single atom of earth, water, fire, and air, or form, sound, scent, and taste. Then when you have all 8 of those kinds, at least 8 of those 8 kinds, combined together into the smallest possible bit that could possibly create a visual consciousness, that is what we mean by saying particle here. Then we have, and it'd be the same. That's the visual form. The smallest possible particles that are able to create sound, or to create scent, or to create taste, and touch, and so forth. Those are what we mean. They're the external sense bases. So not the actual substance here. And as I explain this, I realize that I might have to look at something again in this commentary. But I'll take, in the translation, I'll take a look at that later. We'll discuss that in a moment. Particles of substance are not meant here. So this means not earth, water, fire, and air. The atoms there, because they're too small for the faculties to perceive and have no parts. The letters, or phonemes, are the units of the names, and the phonemes in names and words, which are the vocal sounds that are the basis for forming names. In other words, when you use a name such as Tashi, let's use a good standard Tibetan name, Tashi, you've got several different phonemes. You've got the ta, and you've got the a, you've got the sha, and the e. So you've got Tashi, you've got 4 phonemes sort of that are combined there, right? So these phonemes are the basis for names, which are like basic words, and then phrases. Okay? So those are the basic units of these. And then instants are the shortest shortest possible moments of time. And again, there's a little bit of dispute about what we actually mean by the shortest possible moment of time. And basically it's the amount of time that it takes for a consciousness and the 5 mental factors to act together. That's what we basically mean. This is explained in the auto commentary, but just giving it in brief there. So then the units that measure what has combined, and so then when you've got these smallest possible things, and they're almost so small that you can hardly measure them. But if you're going to measure them, well, what do you call them? So we have 2 topics: units of distance and units of time. So we begin with the units of distance, and so this has 3 topics: units from atoms to knuckles, not the normal units that we use, and then we have the units up to earshots. And then the size of the actual unit, the leagues. The actual unit, meaning the one that we've been using for most of our measurements of the world, has been the league. So the units from atoms up to knuckles. So here we have a bunch of interesting names for these units. And I'd love to know the etymology of these names, but I don't really know them. So that but the names are kind of interesting. Called atoms, molecules, and iron, and water, rabbit, sheep, and ox, and particles of sunlight, nits, and what comes from that, and also knuckles. Each is 7 times larger than the previous. So you've got your atom is the smallest, 7 times an atom is a molecule, 7 times a molecule is a particle of iron, 7 times a particle of iron is a particle of water, 7 times that a particle of rabbit, and so forth. Up to particles of nits. And what comes from nits? Lice. Right? So 7 nits makes 1 louse, and 7 lice makes 1 knuckle. And then 3 knuckles makes 1 finger. The finger is not mentioned here because, as it says in the auto commentary, the finger is such a well-known unit of measure. There's no need to describe a finger. But when you talk about a finger, do we mean a finger like this? No, we mean the width of a finger. Okay. The units in the commentary reads, the units called atoms, molecules, and iron, water, rabbit, sheep, and ox, and particles of sunlight, nits, what comes from that, or lice, and also knuckles, are each 7 times larger than the previous. So those go 7 times larger up until knuckles, then 3 knuckles makes 1 finger. So you've got 1, 2, 3 knuckles in your finger, and so it's the same, except here we're measuring across. Okay. So if we wanted to do a little bit of math, where did I have that math? So if we say, how wide is a finger? If a finger is what? It's not 20 millimeters across, it's about 15 millimeters. Is that about right? 15 millimeters for a finger? Or is it 17, 18? What should we say? Because this is going to be the basis for everything. If the finger is measured as 15 millimeters across, probably more like 18. Let's go with 18. If you measure the finger as 18 millimeters across, and I should have just gotten out the ruler and measured my finger, but who knows whose finger they're talking about, then you'd say a knuckle is 6 millimeters across. So now a knuckle is 7 times larger than a louse, so a louse would be 0.86 millimeters across, and that is 7 times larger than a knit, which would be 0.12 millimeters. The knit is a unit called a knit is 7 times larger than a particle of sunlight, so that would be 17 thousandths of a millimeter. That is 7 times larger than an ox, which would be 24 10,000ths, and so on. When you get to sheep, they're at 3.5 times 10 to the negative 4th power, all the way down to atoms, which are 2.12 times 10 to the negative 8th power, if you're just using it. So you can make yourself a little spreadsheet as I did, or you can do your math on your own. But what you're getting down to is a very small particle. And remember here, when we're talking about atoms, I think what is specified in the previous topic, we're talking about not the atoms of earth, water, fire, and so forth. What we're talking about are the smallest ones that are capable of producing sensory cognition. But I need to check this out because I'm just sort of right now putting the 2 and 2 together, so I need to check it out. But when you think about it, that's a very, very small particle that would be considered possible to create a sensory cognition, and I don't think that we're able to see a particle of that size with our naked eye. So I have to look at this. There was an interesting thing also that I saw one time when I was visiting the United States in the late 10,000s. While I was working on this, there was an article on National Public Radio, of all things. I used to listen to it, where they talked about how actually some scientists had done some calculations, and they discovered that when you took these measurements and one back following these, and you got down to the smallest measurement, that measurement was the size of a large hydrocarbon molecule. I don't know what sort of there must be. I'm not a chemist. My chemistry days have been long since over 38 years ago. So I don't remember well enough I don't know how big a hydrocarbon, but they were kind of talking about how interesting it was that these hydrocarbon molecules that are so important building blocks for organic life are the large ones are like the same size as the talked about in the Buddha thing. So they had a radio show on that. So I just couldn't help but throwing out that factoid there. Okay, so now we go to units up to earshots. So when you go from knuckles, you have 3 knuckles equals a finger. And so you can get from your finger up to the level of an earshot. There are 4 and 20 fingers to a cubit, 4 in every fathom of those. 500 make an earshot. So there are 4 and 20 fingers to a cubit. So you've got 24, you just kind of measure, like your cubit is that long, right? So there's 4. I'm getting 5 there. At any rate, there are 24 fingers makes 1 cubit. And then a cubit makes a fathom. Now another translation of this word could be arm span. It's basically meaning that arm span, but in English we call that unit actually a fathom, so I'm using the Old English word. Now, of course, these days we measure a fathom itself as 6 feet in the imperial system. But this arm span, or this fathom here, is not necessarily the same exactly as an imperial fathom, but approximately, you can imagine. Basically, that's how big it is, right? So 500 of those is an earshot, because that's about as far as you can hear. Lodra Sampo, in his translation of the auto commentary, calls it a calling distance. You can call it what you want. Anyways, earshot. Because when you're an earshot out of town, you're out of earshot. And not 8 earshots makes a league. So we've discussed this a little bit. That's about approximately 4.5 miles, 7.5 kilometers. But this is approximate. Now, in Sanskrit, this unit, the league, I'm skipping a little bit here. So that 500 make an earshot. And then we have the unit of a hermitage, which is a hermitage, it is said. 1 earshot out of town is a hermitage, it is said. This is because you want to be outside of town, far enough that you're out of town that it's not going to disturb you, but you can still go in for your alms without being too difficult. So when you're 500, think about it, that's 500 earshots is just about a kilometer, give or take. And so a kilometer is about a 12-minute walk into town, if you're walking at 5 kilometers an hour, which is a good walking pace. So if you're strolling as a mindful bhikshu, it might take you 20 minutes. So you go in and you can get your meal without spending an inordinate amount of time going back and forth to the village. And yet you're far enough away that the village life is not going to disturb you. So now we've come to the size of the actual unit, the league, and 8 of those are called a league. So 8 earshots, or 8 hermitages, are a league. A yojana in Sanskrit. So a yojana in Sanskrit, there are many different sizes given, and if you look it up online, I think I have read that the ranges of yojanas go from anywhere between 4 to 11 miles, just depending upon your source. So again, when we're talking about the presentations given here in the Abhidharma, we have to remember that these are kind of dependent upon time and place. They did not, in the time of the Buddha, have a standard kilo in some museum in Paris that they used as the basis for determining all of the different units of measure. No one had thought of that yet. So the name yojana, or which I've translated as league, is kind of flexible in different presentations. But in generally, it's a fairly long distance. So if you think leagues are pretty long in English, and that's the idea. So now we've come to the units of time, and this has 2 topics, the length of a year and the length of an eon. So the length of a year has to be calculated starting from the shortest possible instant, which is an instant. So we have 2 points. The length of the months used to measure. So used to measure years. So you measure years by months, right? And that's measured in instants. 120 instants is an instant of that. 60 of those is a minute. Hours and days and month are 30 times as long as previous. So here, how do we relate this to the, well, I'll read the commentary first. 120 instants of the limit of time, that is the amount of time it takes for like the mind and mental factors to come together and work together. The form, basically. Form and arise and perish, basically. So that is an instant of, so 120 times that instant is an instant of that. 60 of those is a minute. Now, we discussed minute the other day, if you remember. Minute, here a minute is not necessarily the same as a modern minute. And 30 of those is an hour. Again, it's not necessarily the same as a modern hour. Hours and days and months are 30 times as long as the previous. So you've got 30 hours to the day, 30 days to the month. So, therefore, if you take it from a 24-hour, what we consider a 24-hour day, these to compare it to the modern units of time, so a modern day, if you divide it into 24-hour, gives you 60-minute hours, right? But if you divide it into 30 hours per day, then your hours are going to be 48 modern minutes. Those 48 modern minutes, though, are only 30 of the ancient minutes. So those would be, as we discussed the other day, 96 seconds, modern seconds. Okay? So then we have the modern seconds, and so you have 96 modern seconds. So you have the instant of that. So you have instant of that, minute, hour, right? So we've got the hour at 48, the minute at 96 seconds, and the instant of that, there are 60 of those in a minute, so that would mean that they each have to be 1.6 modern seconds long. And then that would mean that the shortest possible minute would be 13.333 milliseconds. That's the instant. That's what we're talking about here, which is interesting because now this is the great exposition tradition. If you look at the Theravada Abhidharma, they give it differently. They talk about, I'm going to get the name wrong. I know I'm going to get the name wrong. Not Jatavana. Not Jataka. Those are different words. Anyways, they've got a particular term for it in the Theravada. There's basically the shortest possible moment of time for the mind to work. And in the Theravada tradition, they say that this moment of time is actually not a fixed duration. Sometimes it goes quicker. Sometimes it goes slower, and so there's kind of a difference. They don't have the same presentation of it being a fixed moment. But in the great exposition tradition, they figured it was a fixed amount of time. In other texts, not in the Abhidharma tradition, it's talked about like you have a pile of palm leaves, and so in the old days, in the ancient Indian tradition, they used to write on palm leaves, which they'd prepare. You'd copy your manuscript on it, and then you'd make them into bundles. In order to do that, you had to put the palm leaves in a pile, and then drive a spike through it in order to make a hole. You had to do that one for each side. So and then you'd put a string through that to bind your bundle of leaves, palm leaves, together. So the amount of time that it took for that spike to pass through each of those palm leaves, because it's going through them one after another. So they figured this is like just about as fast as you go, whack. And so the Great Exposition has measured this as 13 1/3 milliseconds. In modern times, which obviously shows that in modern times we consider that not to be the shortest possible instant. And my study of physics is I just do a little bit of armchair physics, reading popular physics books from time to time. And so I don't know if there is in physics an idea of a shortest possible. I mean, actually, in quantum physics, I read that there is a Planck instant or something like that. Am I getting it right? I'm probably way off of it, but there's like a Planck instant and a Planck unit. Like there's that in some presentations of quantum physics, which there are probably a bunch of different ones, they consider that there is actually a shortest possible amount of time and a shortest possible amount of distance, but these are both way smaller than what we're talking about here in the Abhidharma. At any rate, the important thing is they're kind of thinking about it in this term. But this being the Great Exposition term, they're kind of literal when it gets down to the lowest things. They don't have a view of emptiness because it's not necessary for their school. And frankly, it isn't really doesn't really matter a whole lot how long your actual shortest possible instant is, as long as you have this, as long as you're able to use your understanding of subtle impermanence to really gain an idea of the truth of suffering. It's by understanding that, by saying, so they're looking in meditation and they're able to distinguish these really quick moments and seeing that everything is changing from moment to moment. So in every instant, that is every 13.3 milliseconds. And cognition is arising and ceasing, arising and ceasing. That's very, very quickly. This is probably faster than most of us can actually perceive in our own minds. So it's only when you get to a really high level of meditation are you actually able to perceive these moments, just as similar to in the Theravada tradition when they're talking about the Jatavana. That's what they call them, the Jatavana moments. So these Jatavana moments and the instance in the Great Exposition tradition, they're similar. They're both very, very fine. And in order to be able to perceive them, you have to have a really good control. You have to have a very stable meditation to perceive them. And the point of perceiving of them is that when you are able to see that your mind is changing that rapidly, and when you're able to see that it's not just your mind, but also all the external forms. So it's everything, all five aggregates. The name and the forms of aggregates are all changing, every forming and reforming in every short instance. That understanding is critical for the path of the Great Exposition, and it's also critical for the middle way, because we look at things and we think that they endure for longer than that. So understanding that things are made there's a really short, finite amount of time that things arise and perish. And it's going really quickly. They're rising and perishing. And if things are rising and perishing in every 13 milliseconds, then that's faster than the refresh rate on my screen. It's like, or maybe it isn't, I don't know how fast, but it's like so quickly and that things are doing. And it's not just a refresh rate on a screen. That we can get our heads around. It's actually the entire box that has the screen. It's the glass in the screen. It's the keyboard. It's all that. It's everything around. So it's not just like the external movies that we see on a screen that are refreshing at 24, 36 times a second. Here we're talking about actually the fundamental material is changing at that level. And this is an important understanding, because when you really understand subtle impermanence, then, and more than just understanding it, when you actually perceive subtle impermanence, that brings you closer to an understanding of emptiness in the Mahayana. So this understanding subtle impermanence is crucial, or realizing subtle impermanence is a crucial part of the Great Exposition, the foundation vehicle path, and it's also important in the Great Exposition, in the Great Vehicle Path. So we've gotten our units from instants up to months. And then we go from months to years, the actual year. Including the impossible days, there are 12 months in every year. Including the 6 impossible days, there are 12 months in every year. So the impossible days, what this refers to is, here we're talking about a lunar year. And it doesn't talk about the lunar years when you have 13 months. They're just talking about a 12-month lunar year. And so you have basically the problem is you've got 3 sort of things that have to kind of mesh. You've got you've got the solar days, which are basically, just to say it in the modern terms, I'm trying to think of it in ancient terms. There's the solar year, which is the length of time it takes the Earth to orbit the Sun in our current understanding. In that day, it would have been the length of time between, as the Sun moves south and north, as we talked about, remember why the sun days are shorter and longer. The Sun moves south and north. So when it moves south, then it is summer, and when it's north, then it's winter. Is that right? No, it's when it moves north, it's summer, and when it's south, it moves, whichever it is. There's that movement of the sun that determines the length of a year, or, in our modern understanding, that length of time. And then there is the actual length of a day. So we can think of that now as, the time that it takes the Earth to rotate once. In those days, it was the time that it took the sun to orbit once, right? And then you've got the months, and so that's the moon that is going around the Earth. And so you've got all sorts of different measures. And if we kind of do it in modern terms, if we do it in rough terms, we'd say, 365 days per year, you've got 24 hours in a day, and you've got 30 days per lunar month. Well, no, you don't have 30 days per lunar month. You actually have 29.5 or so, not exact. And you don't have 360 days, 5 days per solar year. You actually have 365.24 and some odd. Not 25, because otherwise you'd have leap years every 4 years instead of skipping them on the millennium, right? So 0.24 on the extra years. But that's the modern calendar. But at any rate, the main point is that the solar day, the length of time that it takes the sun to orbit the great mountain, and the lunar days, the 30 days making up a lunar month, don't quite fit. So you have this problem where there is an extra day every couple months, and if you don't account for that in your astronomy and everything, then you're just going to get out of whack. Right? If you think that the lunar months are 30 days and you count 30 days, then pretty soon, it's not going to take very long before your full moon days are falling at the crescent moon. So you have to account for this. And so the way they did this was the impossible days. And the impossible day means that every 2 months you have to just discard 1 day. And this is, when 1.5 months of autumn, of rains, and of the spring have passed, the wise from the half month remaining discard one impossible day. So you've got the 4 seasons. You've got autumn, rains, and spring. And each has 4 months. So every 2 months, on the waning phase of the second month, you discard a day. Or wait a minute. No, we're talking about, it's probably on the waxing phase, because we have the months that start after the full moon, right? Okay. At any rate, basically every 2 months you're dropping a day. And we still do this in the Vinaya. This is the practice that was then brought into the Vinaya. So when you're calculating when to do the sojong, the poshada purification ceremony, then traditionally this was done by every 3 phases you would just skip a day. On the waning phase, you'd skip a day. Okay, and so that's a tradition. Now these days, some people just follow the Tibetan calendars and go on the full and the new moons. But you can also count the sojong in that way. Okay, so that is the actual year. 360 days, and I'm sure they must have realized that if you didn't adjust your year by adding a month every 3 years, you're going to be way off eventually. So that's not explained here. The length of an eon, this is 3 topics: identifying eons, the way the long beginning diminishes, and destructive eons. So this is 2 topics. So the identifying eons, there are 2 topics. There's an overview, a brief presentation, then an explanation. So the overview says the many types of eons are explained. So there are many different types of eons that we talk about. But basically, in the sutras and treatises, as it says here, in the sutras and treatises, the many types of eons are explained. There are intermediate eons, eons of destruction, eons of formation, and great eons. We can also talk about it as eons of staying and the empty eons. There are other types of eons that are also mentioned, but the main ones are intermediate eons, eons of destruction, eons of formation, and great eons. We touched on these the other day because when we were speaking about the lifetimes. So this is 3 topics. First is explaining eons of destruction and formation, then explaining eons of abiding, and then explaining great eons. So the main reason for needing to talk about things in terms of eons is that when you get above a certain point, there are no years because the sun is at the middle of Mount Meru, and so for all the gods above Mount Meru, you can't measure anything in years because they don't have years. So you measure it in eons. And so how long is an eon of destruction? So we have the eons of destruction and formation. We'll talk about destruction first. An eon of destruction lasts from when? There are no hell beings till the world's destroyed. An eon of destruction lasts from the time at the end of an eon of abiding when the lifespan is 80,000 years. That is here in the Rose Apple land where the human life can increase or decrease. And there is no birth of a new hell being in the incessant hell, and its prior inhabitants have all died, so that it is empty. So what happens during that last increase before the world is destroyed, the universe is destroyed, all of the beings in the incessant hell die gradually, one after another. And no new beings are reborn in the incessant hell in this world. Those beings who have committed karma to be reborn in the incessant hell are reborn in incessant hell in other universes. Because remember, we've got the universe of the great 3000s, and this is just one of an infinite number of other universes. So the universes in the great 3000s, the billion universes in the great 3000s, all are destroyed together. So all of the beings who would be reborn in those billion incessant hells are all being reborn in other incessant hells. And then in the same way, the other hells and hungry ghosts and animal realms are also gradually destroyed. That is, they're emptied. First, the realms are emptied. So those beings who are in those realms die and are reborn in higher realms. This is a time when merit is increasing, or they're reborn in other universes. No new beings are born in those hells. Those whose karma it is to be reborn in hell are born in other universes. And the same thing with the hungry ghosts. So first the incessant, and then the great, the extremely hot, and then the hot, and so forth, up to the reviving hell. They all empty one after another. And then the hungry ghost realm, the same thing happens. The hungry ghosts all die and are either reborn in higher realms or in other universes. Mostly they're going in higher realms, it seems, from reading this. And then the animals, what happens is the animals the animals who live in the seas again, they perish because their lifespan is over and they're not reborn as animals in this universe. They go up or they go over to another universe. When we get to the animals on land die together with the humans. And so the humans on the Rose Apple land die out first, and then those on the right. The humans on the Rose Apple land, without any teacher, attain the first jhana by the Dharma nature, gradually die and are born in the Brahma's world. So what happens is there's one human who in the Rose Apple land who achieves the first jhana, and then they arise from the jhana and they say, "Oh my, the pleasures of the dhyana, the pleasures of withdrawal from desire. Such are these pleasures." And everyone else who hears them, then by the Dharma nature, which means because of their previously accumulated karma, they are able to achieve that samadhi. And so they finish their lifespans in the Rose Apple land, and then they die. And because they've achieved the first jhana, they are reborn in the first level of form. And then the same thing happens on the eastern superior body, western bountiful cow, and northern unpleasant sound. The humans on unpleasant sound, because they have been spending their entire lives kind of just enjoying things. They're on unpleasant sound, you're basically just using up your good karma from the past. You're not doing anything particularly bad, but you're not doing anything good either. And so those humans are not reborn in the form realm, they're born as desire realm gods. And then the desire realm gods are then successively reborn in the first dhyana. And then those in the first dhyana achieve the second dhyana by dharma nature and so forth. And so this is the course of the destruction of sentient beings. So the sentient beings basically all go extinct over the course of 19 eons, up to the fourth level of dhyana. Then, well, actually, it depends on which eon. How many eons it's been. Sometimes the first, second, or third, or fourth dhyana is destroyed, and sometimes it's not. Then the 7 suns that are 4 times as hot as our own sun appear. So you've got 7 suns appearing in the sky. And all of the brooks, rivers, the 4 great rivers, the unheated lake, in fact, all the bodies of water, the great oceans, up to the supreme mountain dry up. So the 7 suns are so hot that all the water dries up, the land is baked out, and then catches on fire. Smoke billows and fires burn, the container of the world becomes one great fire, and everything up to Brahma's world, so that is, including Brahma's world, is burnt without a trace of anything left. So it's just completely burnt. There's nothing left. So from the mandala of air on the bottom, the mandala of water and gold and all the oceans, all the mountains, up to the realm of Brahma. So the realm of Brahma, you've got 3. You've got Brahma's realm, you've got Brahma's ministers, and great Brahma. Those 3 are all also destroyed by fire. So everything up to Brahma's world is burnt without a trace, and the world, container world, is destroyed, burnt without even a trace left over, is destroyed. That lasts 1 intermediate eon, which lasts a total of 20 intermediate eons. In the same way, everything up to the second dhyana is destroyed by water. So then there's destruction by water, and that carries away not just the first dhyana, but it also carries away the second dhyana. And then there's destruction by air, and that carries away everything up to the third dhyana. The fourth dhyana is free of the faults of meditation that would cause that types of destruction, and so therefore the fourth dhyana is not destroyed by the elements. So that's the destruction of the universe, and so that in total lasts 20 intermediate eons. So then there's the formation. So after the world remains empty for 20 intermediate eons, formation is from primordial wind until a being exists in hell. So the eon of formation is after the destruction by fire, water, and air. It lasts 1 intermediate eon from the primordial formation of the wind mandalas that are under the ground, first under full virtue, radiate light, great Brahma, and then in order down to conflict free. So full virtue is the third level of the third jhana. So each of the levels of jhana, they form the mandala of wind that holds each of those up, down to great Brahma. Then in great Brahma, you get one being who's born in great Brahma. And he thinks, it's me, I'm Brahma. And then you've got all the beings who are next born in Brahma's ministers, and they think, he's great Brahma. and so forth. And you've got the beings in Brahma's abode, and then down through the desire realm gods, gradually populating down as kind of beings are getting a little bit worse and coarser until finally you get to humans, and then from humans down into that. So after that, in the same order, from the first rebirth of one being in the fourth, third, or the second dhyana into full virtue, radiant light, or great Brahma, beings are reborn in the God realms in descending order. So you've got one who shows up in each realm first, and then someone shows up in the realm below, and then someone shows up in the realm below. Humans are born successively in the north, west, east, and southern continents. So like the north is northern unpleasant sound is where the humans first appear, then in the bountiful cow, then in the superior body, then in the rose apple land. And as a result of humans in rose apple land acting non-virtuously, they're born in animal, hungry, ghost, and hell realms. So at first in the rose apple land, beings have an immeasurably long lifetime, but because they start getting attached, at first they just live in, it's like there's bountiful grain everywhere around and they can enjoy it all. And no one needs to think mine or anything like that. They just enjoy what's there. And then they start to get attached to that grain. And because they get attached to it, it no longer grows naturally. They have to plant it, and so life gets harder and harder until gradually, at the end of eventually they end up with a life of only 80,000 years long. They're acting non-virtuously because there's a kind of degeneration. And then some are reborn as animals, and then some animals are reborn as hungry ghosts, and hungry ghosts are reborn as hells, all the way down to one being attains the existence of a prior state in the incessant hell. So the prior state being a lifetime after one person. In other words, saying someone's reborn in the incessant hell. So that period lasts 19 intermediate eons. So you've got one eon where the mandalas of wind are being formed, and then 19 where they're being populated. Okay? So that's the 20. So that's the eon of formation. So you had the eons of destruction, you had 20 empty eons that are not mentioned in the text, then you have the eons of formation. And then we have eons of abiding. This has, again, an explanation and a summary. So the explanation has 4 points. The long beginning. An intermediate eon lasts from when life is incalculable till it is 10 years. So the first one, when the first beings appear in the rose apple land, their life is incalculably long, right? Then it gradually gets shorter and shorter and shorter until such a time as it is 10 years. The amount of time it takes to go from an incalculable lifetime down to a lifetime of 10 years is one intermediate eon. So that's the first intermediate eon of the eon of abiding. The eon of abiding is 20 intermediate eons. So of these, an intermediate eon lasts from when the lifespan of humans is incalculable, then it decreases to 80,000 years, and then until it is the lifespan of 10 years. This is the first one. And this one intermediate eon is called the long beginning. So that's the first intermediate eon in the eons of abiding. Then there are 18 intermediate cycles. Then another 18 increasing and decreasing. Then after that, there are another 18 intermediate eons that have lifespans that increase to 80,000 and decrease to 10 years. So it's decreased to 80,000, right? That's one intermediate eon. Then it increases from 10 years to 80,000 years. That's a second intermediate eon. And then it decreases down to, that first one was the long beginning. Then we've got 1 of increase, then the 2 is decrease, 3 is increase, 4 is decrease, and so forth, up to 18. So that means 18 is kind of the last time in that eon when you're down at 10 years, or in that great eon, shall we say. Then 1 increasing. The word, and so here in the commentary it says the word then links this to the previous verse. This is kind of, when you read Tibetan commentaries, there are lots of little comments like this that we look at them and it seems like it's so perfectly clear. Obviously, it's like a conjunction or something, right? Well, sometimes in grammar, particularly in Sanskrit grammar, these conjunctions could be a little bit ambiguous, so they wanted to make absolutely precisely clear. They wanted to make absolutely precisely clear in the commentaries what that conjunction actually meant, so that people didn't misinterpret it. At the end of all these, so after those 18 increasing and decreasing, at the end of all these, there is one intermediate eon known as the long ending that has lifespans that lengthen or increase. So they get longer, from 10 years back up to 80,000. So these are the 20 intermediate eons of abiding. So you've got the long beginning, 18 up and down, and then the long ending, that is 20. The maximum increase of the lifespan during those lives are as long as 80,000. Now here we're talking about the humans in the Rose Apple land. The other lands, they don't increase or decrease. During those periods of increase, the lifespan increases to as long as 80,000 years. So then we have the summary, which has 2 points. In this way, this world that is formed lasts 20 intermediate eons. So from the time of formation, when everything is fully populated, you've got 20 eons when everything is fully populated, right? And then after those 20 eons, then you start another period of destruction. So you've got 20 of forming, 20 of full population, 20 of gradual extinction and destruction. Forming, destroying, and remaining after destruction are the same. So the world, when it stays, is 20 intermediate eons, but it's also 20 intermediate eons for the period of formation, the period of destruction, and the period of remaining empty after it has been destroyed. So once the universe is destroyed, it doesn't automatically reform. Now you're thinking, what happens to all those sentient beings? They've been reborn in other universes. Maybe they've been reborn in a 4-dimensional universe. Maybe they've been born in a 2-dimensional universe. Maybe they've been born in a universe that's upside down. Maybe they've been born in a multiverse that's almost exactly like this. Who knows? Whatever their sort of universe their karma takes them to, they're born to that other universe because there are an infinite number of universes. And just a note here, when we're talking about these eons, that these are not just this one world that we are in, but all billion world realms in the great 3000s that we are currently in. They're all formed together. They're all destroyed together. So explaining great eons. So there's 2 topics, the actual and additionally the way the 3 individuals appear. So the first is the actual. These 80 make up one great eon. These 80 such intermediate eons make up one great eon. As explained by the words, just these are time, the nature of an eon is the 5 aggregates. So what we are talking about here is you've got 80, right? You've got 20 of formation, 20 staying, 20 destruction, 20 remaining after destruction. Total of 80, that equals one great kalpa, one great eon. Now the nature of these, what is the nature of these? The nature of these is the 5 aggregates, because it says in the first chapter, when we're talking about the aggregates, it's like the 6th or 7th verse, talking about the aggregates, it says, just these are time. Just these aggregates are time. In other words, saying that there's no aggregate separate from, or there's no time separate from the aggregates. It's when we're talking about instants, what are we talking about? We're talking about the length of time that things come together and fall apart. Cognition, mind and mental factors come together and fall apart. The amount of time that a particle comes together and falls apart. So those moments, there's nothing separate from those. And if you just put enough moments one to another, in the end, we've got an eon. We've got the name eon. We're using that word an eon. It's an incredibly huge number of aggregates strung out over a very long duration of time, but there's nothing, no separate eon, no separate thing that you can find that would be an eon other than the 5 aggregates, other than the form, feeling, conception, formation, and consciousness that of the beings within those times, right? So there's nothing separate. Basically, when we talk in Buddhism, in all schools of Buddhism generally, we have very spare metaphysics. And a lot of philosophical systems, you have ideas about time as being separate, different qualities that have substantial existence separate of things. And in Buddhism, we're saying no. We're basically just saying that we can observe form, feeling, conception, formation, and consciousness. And pretty much anything else we do, giving a name to an eon, giving a name to a second, is actually just giving a name to a collection of those. But ultimately, that's just a name, and it's just really those aggregates that arise and perish in every moment. Same when you're talking about distance. There's nothing there that's, you use the word finger for a finger width, and then we can debate how many millimeters a finger actually is. But when it comes down to it, there is no finger separate from the form aggregate, right? So basically, that's all that the aggregates are. So when we talk about eons, when we talk about the Buddha, we say the Buddha achieved enlightenment after 3 uncountable eons of gathering the accumulation of merit. What do we mean? What type of eon do we mean? And uncountable, what does uncountable mean? So this is what the next section speaks about. The 3 individuals. We talk about the Buddha first, but the Buddha kind of then leads into self-Buddhas and wheel-wielding emperors. So how Buddhas arise, this has 2 points. The cause of Buddhas. The cause of Buddha is what? It's gathering the accumulation of merit over 3 uncountable eons. Then after 3 uncountable of these appears a Buddha. Of these means great eons. Then after 3 uncountable of these great eons of gathering accumulations appears a Buddha. So the Buddha spends 3 uncountable eons, great eons. So a great eon is long enough on its own. Then an uncountable great eon. So when you say uncountable, what do you mean? I mean, if it's uncountable, why would you say that there are 3 of them? How can there be 3 if they're uncountable? So the point is that uncountable is actually just a name given to an extremely large number. Here, so-called uncountable is a novemdecillion, 10 to the 60th power. A number described in the short discourses. They don't use scientific notation in this short discourses. It is the name of a number exists, not something that cannot be counted. So basically, it's just such a huge number that you can't count it, therefore it's called uncountable. But it is a number that you can think about, sort of. So if we're talking about it, what do we mean? So here, Wangchuk Dorje is giving us a kind of list that in Tibetan is perfect verse, and in English it's hard to do in verse. In the auto commentary, there's a line that says you've got ones, then you've got 10 of those ones makes 10, you've got 10 tens makes 100, 10 hundreds makes 1,000, and so forth. And so, just because it's in the original, I didn't know what to do other than just sort of do it with recreate the verse with English words. But part of the point of this is that in Tibetan and Sanskrit, for every different decimal place, there's a new name for that number. So their system of numbering, you just have, like you've got ones, tens, hundreds, thousands. Then 10,000s, there's another name. 100,000, many of us know the word lakhs because we've been in South Asia and we talk about lakhs of money, lakhs of people. Then you've got millions, and then you've got crores. And I guess crores don't come next. What do you have next? Crores or 100 millions? Anyways, they've got different words for each decimal place. In English, we don't do it that way. So we go 1, 10, 100,000, 10,000, 100,000, million, 10, 100, 10 and 100 million. These are the common numbers. Billion, 10 and 100 billion, trillion, 10 and 100 trillion, quadrillion, 10 and 100 quadrillion, quintillion, 10 and 100 quintillion, sextillion, etc., and so forth, all the way down to novemdecillion. That is 1 uncountable. It's a very, very long time, because each great eon is a hugely long period of time. And then you've got a novemdecillion of those, which is, it's like, what is that? That's 10 times 108 octodecillions, you know. You've got all these huge numbers. So why would anyone ever want to become a Buddha? Why would you want to do this? Is it because the Bodhisattva doesn't know that they can achieve liberation as an arhat in just 7 lifetimes? Are they just masochists? What is it? And staying in samsara for such an incredibly huge length of time. I mean, a novem decillion is probably trillions of years, quadrillions of years. And a gradient, this is a huge amount of time. So why would an individual do that? There's a long discussion of this in the auto commentary, which is very interesting because here it's being presenting the path of a bodhisattva briefly from the perspective of the, I'm not sure how much of this is actually the perspective of the great exposition. Vasubandhu, by the time he wrote this text, had already converted to the great vehicle. So it could be that that discussion is influenced by that. That's something for someone else to research. But at any rate, there is a discussion here in this great vehicle, in this great exposition text, a foundation vehicle text, talking about becoming a Buddha. And even in the great exposition, it's different than in the great vehicle. In the great vehicle, we say that the Buddha spent 3 uncountable eons gathering the accumulation of merit. And that the first uncountable eon, he was an ordinary individual, but then he achieved the path of seeing. And then he went through the 7 impure bodhisattva levels for 1 uncountable eon. And then he spent the 3rd uncountable eon on the 3 pure bodhisattva levels before achieving Buddhahood in the Tushita heaven and then appearing in this world to perform the 12 deeds. That's what we say in the great vehicle. But in the foundation vehicle, they don't say that. Because in the great vehicle, you're basically saying that after 1 uncountable eon, then that bodhisattva achieves the path of seeing, and they're no longer really affected by samsaric suffering. There may be the appearances of samsaric suffering, but they're not affected by it. But the great exposition tradition, the Buddha is an ordinary individual from the very moment that he first rouses bodhicitta until he's sitting underneath the Bodhi tree. And so for those entire 3 uncountable great eons, that Buddha is experiencing the same sufferings that we experience, the same torments that we experience, and many of his lifetime more than that, undergoing the same difficulties that we humans do. And so there's a tremendous amount of courage that you have to have in order to do that. I mean, being a bodhisattva, even if you're only talking on the great vehicle path, you're only 1 uncountable eon of undergoing these difficulties, is still, you have to just, it's like this, as the Ninth Karmapa always says, you have to be willing to shoulder that burden and have a lot of courage to be able to do this for an incredibly long time. So why would you do that? And the basic thing is it's out of the compassion. The bodhisattva understands his own suffering and understands what it's coming from and knows that his suffering is painful because it is suffering. By being suffering, it causes him suffering. And that it's not just him or her. It's not just them. It's everyone else too. And so going through that whole period, spending that incredibly long, just inconceivably long period of time, gathering the accumulations of merit. Because of that motivation, realizing, yes, I could achieve liberation myself, but then I wouldn't help anyone else. My suffering is suffering to me because it's suffering. Others' beings is suffering to them because it's suffering, because it is suffering, and because they are suffering, I am also suffering. So I must do what I can to achieve that level of Buddhahood. There's a really incredible motivation we have to think about. I mean, we don't often really think about the bodhicitta. Until I achieve enlightenment, I go forever to the Buddha, Dharma, and Supreme Sangha. Yeah, bodhicitta. But we're not really thinking about it. But think about how long and how much we have to do it. So when you think about it, it's a really actually pretty good question. Why would someone do it? And the basic reason is that the Bodhisattva realizes that bringing benefit to other sentient beings in the end will also bring benefit to the Buddha. Now, another interesting thing about this discussion in the auto commentary is that here it talks about 3 different types of beings. And so this is, you have to remember, the auto commentary was written in the 4th century, well before Atisha wrote his Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment. He talks about 3 different types of beings. Talks about those lesser beings who only want to achieve pleasure for themselves. Then there are the middling type of beings who realize that even the pleasures of samsara are also fundamentally suffering, because you're still in samsara. And so they want to achieve liberation from themselves. So you've got the middling type of individual there. And then you have the great type of individuals, the bodhisattvas, who make this vow: I'm going to achieve enlightenment no matter how long it takes. No matter how many difficulties I undergo, no matter how much pain I experience on the path, no matter if I'm born in the hells, no matter if I'm born as a hungry ghost, I'm going to still follow this path. So this is the path of the greater individual. So this is like, now I think Vasubandhu must have had a source for this, probably from earlier texts. Probably from the great exposition, the Mahavibhasha treatise. And so this is like, we talk about it in the Tibetan tradition. You might wonder, is this only a Tibetan idea that we talk about the 3 types of individuals? No, it's here in Vasubandhu, and Vasubandhu must have brought it from an earlier source. So this is not just Tibetan, it's not something new that Atisha brought and that we then emphasize in the Tibetan tradition. It's a really important idea. And so we have these bodhisattvas who want to achieve enlightenment, who take this vow and they go through it and they have that motivation. And during that entire time, there's still samsaric beings, according to the Great Exposition. Kind of think about it. What is their choice? Yeah, they could become arhats in 7 lifetimes if they managed to meet a Buddha who could then teach them. But they couldn't do it on their own. But when you think about it, I mean, it's an incredibly long period of time, 3 uncountable eons. You have a choice. You can spend 3 uncountable eons undergoing all of these sufferings in order to achieve Buddhahood. Or you can spend 3 uncountable eons undergoing all of these sufferings and no result at the end. So why wouldn't you, in a sense, if you look at it on that level? There's like, I mean, it's like if you want to experience meaningless suffering for eon after eon, then that's all you're going to do, is experience meaningless suffering. Sometimes it'll be good. Sometimes we might think that, well, I'll just be reborn in like the formless realm or the form realm, and then I can hang around for eons. But it's going to come to an end. And when particularly if you're reborn in the formless realm, for the Bodhisattva, and this is now getting out of the Great Exposition, here we're talking back into Mahayana, popping into Mahayana for a second. When you're born in the formless realm, there's absolutely nothing you can do to benefit any sentient being. You have no body. there's no way you can teach Dharma because you haven't got a voice. You haven't got a body. You can't display any miracles because you haven't got a body. So if you're in the formless realm, you've got just an incredibly long lifetime. And you know how it is. Time flies when you're having fun. So I don't think that 80 million, how long was that lifetime? It's 80 eons in the highest level of the formless realm. I don't think that 80 eons, I think it would go by in a blink of an eye. Our monks who are in the 3-year retreat, which always takes 4 years, and the ones who are in there now because of the lockdown get an extra few months, they get out of their 3-year retreat, and it's gone by fast. They just don't know. Like it's just begun. It's like a year flies by, and if your years, the eons fly by. 80 eons, it's over in a snap, and then you're done. And you're back in samsara. And you haven't done anything to help yourself or anyone else. So why would you want to do that? Now, if you're taking the path of the middling type of individual, this is a good path. And you achieve the result of arhatship and so forth. And for the great exposition tradition, at the end of you achieve arhatship and you get to that level, you've achieved that enlightenment, and then you enter the nirvana without remainder. There's no remainder. First you achieve nirvana in this lifetime, but you have the remainder of the 5 aggregates, and then when you pass away from this lifetime, then that remainder also passes away, and there's no 5 aggregates, there's no suffering. It's just cessation. In the Mahayana, we say that the arhats enter the absorption of cessation. I saw an interesting thing by a Theravada writer, I think it was Mahayas. What's the famous one from the 1950s and 60s? Sayadaw something. Name is skipping my mind. He was very famous, and he came to England and the United States and taught there for a while too, but he first became famous in Burma. And he said that after that point, there's just bodhi. But he didn't really specify what bodhi is. So you rest in that bodhi for a while. Now, even if we follow the Theravada tradition and say that that's, what do we say, permanent, eternal, that's just you. That's just one person. And it's not all sentient beings. It's kind of like, just taking the benefit for yourself and not sharing it with other people. So, yeah, it's quicker to get to, a limited number of lifetimes, but the benefit is limited. So you have to really think about it. So this is why when you take a look at it, and of course I have been studying the great vehicle tradition, and I've got all the words of the great vehicle tradition in my mind, and I think about it, and so I come to a passage like this, and I kind of probably am interpreting this more on a great vehicle sort of perspective than perhaps some of the Kashmiri great exposition masters would have. I mean, that's certain that I'm doing that, and it's also certain that what I'm talking about bodhicitta, that I'm probably actually just spouting off words, and I don't really have bodhicitta. It's definite that I don't really have bodhicitta. It's just, it's hard to actually gain that sort of bodhicitta, though we have to try. I mean, I think we have to fake it till we make it to a certain degree, but I'm certainly still at the faking it stage. But the point is, what is the point? I mean, when you think about it in these terms, when you look at it in this way, then it begins to start look reasonable to be willing to spend 3 uncountable eons to gather the accumulation of merit, gather the accumulation of wisdom, and achieve the state of perfect Buddhahood. It's less unreasonable than it would seem at the beginning. But even understanding this means that you have to have a certain amount of faith already to be able to get this sort of logic. You have to even think it's possible. And that's actually a pretty big stumbling block for most of us to actually think that it's possible to achieve Buddhahood. But I could go on forever about this, and I probably shouldn't, because I would start saying things that I shouldn't say more than I'm qualified, and end up just spouting off nonsense. So let's now dedicate the merit of listening to and teaching the Dharma so that all sentient beings may be freed of suffering in the short term and eventually come to the state of perfect Buddhahood, no matter how long it takes. Osanam de tam che se pani tobne nye pedranam pam chene gegana chimbarla trombai sibet sole drova by this merit may we attain omniscience, defeat the enemy, wrongdoing, and free all wanderers from the ocean of existence, churned by great waves of birth, age, sickness, and death. May every being who is sick be swiftly freed of illness. May none of Wanderer's maladies ever occur again, in the words of Shantideva.